Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Asia Global Institute. I'm Hei Tang, the director of the Institute. Today, I'm very happy to introduce my good friend, Paul Cheung, from the National University of Singapore, to come to Hong Kong and Asia Global Institute to talk about demographic challenges. Paul Cheung needs no introduction. I can see that half the room actually came here because they miss their old friends. And also, you probably have worked with him in different capacities. He is currently the director of the Asia Competitiveness Institute at the National University of Singapore Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. He was the director of Singapore's Population Planning Unit, responsible for charting Singapore's population policy from 1986 to 1994. He was the chief statistician of Singapore from 1991 to 2004. And he was the chief statistician of the United Nations from 2004 to 2012. Paul has been studying many different issues that Asian economies are facing. Demographic challenges are probably most of the countries in Asia are dealing with every day. Today, the financial secretary of Hong Kong is announcing the new budget. Obviously, the aging population in Hong Kong will continue to increase the fiscal burden on the Hong Kong government. During lunch, I was chatting with Paul with other guests, and we asked him what is the solution that he can bring to Hong Kong based on what the Singaporean government has done. And I'm sure he's going to share a lot of his wisdom and knowledge and experiences that he accumulated for many years working in different agencies and government. Without further ado, Paul, please.
Thanks, Hei. Yeah. How's the sound? Is it okay? Okay, yeah. Thanks for the introduction. And it's indeed the reason why there are so many people here, because a lot of them are my friends. I asked them to come, despite the fact that there's a budget announcement going on. But the fact that many of you are here means that this year there's no handouts, right? There's no good news in the budget. Yeah. I was fortunate to be a Hong Kong boy, and then went to Singapore, and then studied there, and studied university there. Eventually went back to teach, and then the government pulled me out to be in charge of the Singapore's population policy in 1986, many years ago, many years ago. And so I know the Singapore population policy and the dynamics very well. And then when we're looking at Asia, and then recently, we need to change the slide. Yeah. And recently, there have been a lot of news about Asia demographics. And some of these are really alarming. And then like China's population demographic crisis, Japan population crisis, Hong Kong alarming, and so on and so forth. Everything is bad. I don't know whether we have any South China Morning Post here, reporters here. South China Morning Post love crisis. Everything you read, the post is crisis. And I was going to tell them that maybe they should change their vocabulary a little bit. Yeah. But the question here is it really hype, or is it the reality? Okay. When I was in Singapore in 1986, working on the Singapore population policy, at that time there was also a lot of talk about population crisis in Singapore. But now we haven't heard that much. The word are hardly used at all in Singapore. But in the rest of the world, and now particularly talking about China, this crisis narrative become very prominent. In Japan, experienced negative population growth in 2008. China experienced population growth, population decline, negative population growth in 2022. And now they're all saying that, wow, there is a demographic crisis in China. I said, excuse me. I mean, just looking at one number, you are saying that there's a critical demographic crisis in China. I think we are jumping the gun quite a bit. So this crisis narrative traces back to the time when we talk about population bomb, and now we're talking about this low fertility. And in some of the regions, and I'm going to come to that, particularly in Europe, in the 1980s, they talked quite a bit about demographic crisis as well. But now they have moved on from a crisis talk to talk about adaptability. What are the policies that the country should adopt to address this issue. So you hardly see the word about European demographic crisis anymore. Now, when we talk about demographic crisis, it's only in Asia. Why? Because all these are knee-jerk reactions. But on the other hand, we have to realize that with all this talk about the crisis narrative, they didn't really result in much change in population policy. The lack of action is just as alarming as the demographic facts. So, coming back, is it hype or is it reality? It's both. There is a reality of population decline or population movement, but there's also a lot of hype. So the question here is that when I look back at all this news, and then when I think back in 1980s when people were talking about population crisis in Singapore, and then how we resolve it, and now over the years we have been talking about pro-growth message since 1986, when we started working on the new population policy. So this is our PM Chinese New Year message. Every year, Chinese New Year message, he will talk about the same thing. But this year is Dragon Year, so we're going to hit it. I don't know how many babies we're going to hit. In 1986, when I helped to change the new policy, 1988 was a Dragon Year. That year we have a bonus because we throw in a lot of money. It happened to be a Dragon Year. Wow, we got a big harvest. Created a lot of problem. Very hard to get into schools for those cohort, So the question here is that in 1986, we put in place a solid platform for addressing population issues, helping to reduce childbearing costs, helping to reduce child rearing costs, facilitating all kinds of things in 1986. And most important of all, introducing a systematic migration policy to help us to address this below replacement fertility. Why is it that in Singapore we have set such a good example? Other countries never follow. 1986, 36 years ago. So the lack of action is interesting. And I think it's worth later for some discussion. In European experience, as I mentioned, in 1980s, there was a lot of talk. There was a growing concern, and then in the 90s, they broadened the debate. Then they bring in all the other things. But now they really talking about how to come up with an adaptive strategy in Europe. And so the key thing is that the European demographic crisis is a term that's seldom used anymore. And now they're talking about adaptation strategy, and then the response to demographic change should put more focus on adapting policies and so on and so forth. So if you are interested, you can just read up on the European Union publication. They just came up with a new policy last year, 3 November, and then we will also come to that a little bit later. So the question here is that because of the talk about demographic crisis, now you are getting a lot more reaction from the policymakers. And so last year, the Japan Prime Minister talked about now or never, and so on and so forth. And then in Taiwan, Taiwan is the worst country on this. I will come back to that a bit later. And 2022, the legislative UN research, they talk about how bad the situation is, but there's absolutely no action. Come back to my point. Why so little action to address this issue? But before that, let me go through some demographic facts. I intend to talk for about 40 minutes, and then we'll allow for more time for interaction. So there is a shared Asian demographic destiny. So since 1970s, all the population, the demographic have been trending downwards. This is a TFR, the fertility rate, and you can see that it's all coming down. In the 1990s, we are all hitting very low level. Last year, not last year, 2022 was the worst year. All the country hit either 1 or below 1. I don't know why, and I would think COVID played a big role. We have to accept that COVID put fear into a lot of people's life about forming a family and moving forward and all that. So this is the demographic reality that we face. And not only that, but because we have a long history of now below replacement fertility. So people are getting used to a small family size. So in 1986, when I became Director of Population Planning Unit, I told at that time Lee Kuan Yew and Goh Chok Tong that no problem. At that time, Chinese family, they still love to have bigger family because the family, they grew up with bigger ship sets, a lot of brothers and sisters. So the ideal family size is still much bigger. Once we facilitate that, we will be able to achieve much higher fertility. That was 1986. Now, the family norm has changed. People are used to coming with a small family, so it's so much harder now for us them to have more kids. And the biggest problem, of course, is marriage problem. And when I got my job in 1986, is when I went for the interview, then they were asking me all kinds of questions. Then I said the biggest problem was marriage. And they accepted my arguments, and that's how we started the love boat business. So I was on the love boat, and it was quite interesting. And, but then there was only once and only time, you know. After that, there's too much drama on the love boat, so they dare not have it again. And so there's a lesson to be learned somewhere here. So it's a generation of low fertility. People, the small family size norm have already sunk in, and we are talking about prolonged period of fertility having below replacement level. So as a result, having less baby, and because of the cohort movements, you have more death, so you are getting population decline. So in China, just starting, Japan has started a few years, Korea also, Taiwan, all these are very well-known examples. But there is a contrarian example, that is Singapore. Singapore, even though we have a population decline, a population low fertility as long back as in history as all the other Asian countries, but we are exception. We don't have population decline. Why? This is because of the immigration policy. We have a systematic way of harvesting citizens from PRs and from migrant workers. So every year we take in about 20,000 citizens from a pool of 500,000 PRs. And this steady inflow of prime age new citizens provided support to the whole population structure, and then generating babies, and then and allowing for the really still a very healthy age structure to meet the economic needs. So Singapore is the only exception among all these low fertility countries. So all the countries had already passed through the demographic dividends in the 2000 era, and now we are all into the period where we are facing higher, greater burden of an aging society. But the key thing is really this regenerative capacity. When PM of Japan said that now on level, what is he saying? He's saying that, look, if we don't do anything now, it'll be very difficult for us to reverse this population decline. Why? This is the reason. The regenerative capacity is defined by actually by the number of married women. I remember in when I was the director of population planning unit, and then our prime minister at that time was going to set a target of 50,000 births a year. I said, forget it, it's not possible. So I was very young, I was very daring. I said, no way, don't set that as a policy objective. Why? Because the number of married women will decline. And when your number of married women will decline, and if they were reproducing at a certain rate, you are not going to get the number that you need. So this example, so the number of married women, if childbirth exists only within marriage, then the decline in the number of married women means that there are fewer women to have babies. And coupled with a small family size ideal, you are not going to get the number of babies that you need. Full stop. So this regenerative capability is very important. So for them to go back to the same level of birth, their TFR will have to be much, much higher. The family size will have to be much, much higher to generate the same number of birth. Is it possible? Very difficult. So this is, in a way, key to the understanding of whether the population decline can be reversed or not. So what's the future scenario? The rapid population aging in size and proportion is unavoidable. In absolute size, is because the baby boom cohort are moving on, so they are definitely will become more they're aging, and so the size is there. And then in terms of proportion is the shrinking of the cohorts. So this is a standard, explanation on this population aging about size and proportion. So the approach for us, most of us, when we think about this, is we're talking about looking at it from a development perspective, how to make the aged people more useful, or from the well-being perspective, how to make the aged people more better taken care of. So this population aging is a constant, it's a structural factor. It will always be there. So a country cannot say that we can just grow our population out of this population aging problem. Not possible. So in other words, a country needs to have a solid, well thought through set of policies to deal with your population aging problem. So that is something that's constant. Then you have three scenarios. You have an accelerated decline, assuming that nothing is changed. TFR continue to stop at level 1, and then and the number of married women, because of cohort changes, will continue to decline. So every year, the number of babies being generated will be fewer and fewer. So population decline will become deeper and faster. And that's why the PM said it's now on level, you don't do it. So accelerated decline is a scary scenario. And that's not a hype, it is scary. But it's not overnight, there will be a stretch, a period of time. It could have been a moderated speed of decline. The speed of decline could be moderated. So TFR during when the so-called the European demographic crisis period was dropping to about 1.2, 1.3. But now in the Western developed country, the TFR has settled somewhere around 1.5. Now, if the TFR had gone back to 1.5, even though they will not be generating as many babies because of fewer married women, but the decline will be slower, it will be moderated. So we are not talking about as an extreme as if you have a TFR of 1.0. So that is a pretty good ground. But having a TFR of 1.5, you are moderating the speed of decline, but you are not solving the problem. In other words, you are prolonging the issue, so there will be still a decline over time. So eventually, the decline will be slower, but it's still there. So the question is, how do you attain stable population? Then the question here is that do we really want replacement migration? Or at a lower level of population size with much, much older share, bigger share of the older people? Now that's the Japan model. Japan has very little immigration, so now 10% of the Japan population is already 80 and over, 10%. That percentage can easily drop if they started immigrating and bringing in more immigrants into the working ages. Then overall you pull the percentage down. And that's what we call a stable population. But then that is the policy option for the government to decide. And Japan has not been able to make a decision. So they pass the buck from one administration to another administration, and the buck will continue to be passed. So what's going to happen? I don't know, But still, Japan is a very nice country to visit, regardless, yeah. So in the 2023 October, European Commission issued a report on the European adaptive strategies. And after many years of consultation, so they call this a comprehensive approach to demographic change. And they focus on 4 pillars. The first pillar is about parents, facilitating the reconciliation of work and private life and the reallocation of family plans and realization of family plans. Basically, make people achieve their ideal family size. So this is essentially family policy. Youth is to enable young people to realize their full potential in the high quality learning environment, facilitate the transition to work life. This is basically your manpower policy. You have fewer people, you make sure that your people are learning the best technology, learning as much as they can, so one person can stand for 2 or 3 others. So you may lose the numbers, but you don't lose in quality. So this is manpower policy. Then you have older persons, and then that's basically, as I said, is the humanitarian policy and your development policy. You have a big group of older baby boom cohorts moving into old age. How are you going to make use of them? How are you going to retrain them? How are you going to take advantage of their experience? And that is another host of policies there. And finally, and that's the trickiest one, is migration. Attract and integrate talent from outside the EU. That's it. 4 baskets of policy. Not solving the population crisis, but adapting to the population and demographic change. In the future, we know that where the baby is going to come from. Africa, India. But that's the scenario that nobody wants to think about, the global rebalancing of all the demographic dynamics. But in the meantime, if you work on these 4, that's what European model will hope, maybe will continue, that they can maintain the current lifestyle or the societal arrangements for a while. And they did a survey. And the survey found out that population aging was the main issue they considered. Shrinking workforce is another big issue. Migration and integration, not so much, because after the refugee crisis, I think they are now become a little bit more sensible. And and then depopulation and brain drain, they are not too worried about it because it's more subjective. So it's quite interesting across all the country, what are the main issues and all that. So coming back to what should we do now? I started by talking about demographic crisis, then I go into some demographic realities, and then looking at the scenarios. Now we're coming back to the policy aspect of it. How should we rebalance the demographics as a public policy? So there's 2 key objectives. One is to try to address extreme distortions to demographics, so that you don't have gaps. Suddenly you run out of people, run out of males, or so on and so forth. And then you facilitate the societal adaptation to this new reality. And this reality is that there will be fewer babies, there will be more older people, and then increasingly manpower shortage will be a big issue. So let's talk about the age structure distortion. Basically, because of the shrinking of the lower base, then fewer people are entering into working age groups, and then more people going to the older age. So this seems to be permanent, but the question is a matter of magnitude. So one of the key strategies many people are using, many countries are using, is really the workforce enlargement through this institutional rearrangement. So first of all, the most common is redefining the retirement age. And the link to it is to adjust the pension liability, which is very important. So in the old days, remember those days that people tend to retire at age 55, then move to 60, now move to 65. In Singapore, move to 67. And then now we are saying that age is only a number. Never mind about retirement age, you know. So become more and more flexible. And then in Japan, they say, oh, we should redefine what is considered aged elderly. In the past, people upon reaching 65, they're considered old. And now they say, oh, 65 to 75, you are pre-old. So I'm very happy with that, you know. And I was already telling my friends that Singapore is a very youth-oriented society, okay? When you are 40 years old, you're supposed to hit the peak of your career. And you're supposed to stay at the peak for 10 years. And after that, the government will throw you out. 50, they throw out, but now they change a little bit. And but then I'll say that, wow, the country that I should go is really Japan. No problem, you know, you go all the way to 80, you're still pre-old age. So when it's old age, you know, depends how they want to draw a line. But the pension reliability become a problem. Singapore, we are lucky, we got out of the pension liability. Pension liability is a huge political issue. In France, there was a lot of riots. Japan, Taiwan was something about, they were talking about it, and then a few years back, and they make some adjustment. But any country with a huge welfare burden linked to age, if that burden is structurally linked, and then they are in trouble. Because lifespan is getting longer and so on and so forth. So the other one is skill upgrading. You can redefine the old age. So this playing tricks, you know. In the past, old age is starting from 65, now old age starts at 75. Then what do people do during that period when they go into 60? Are they able to catch up? Are they able to learn new things? Are they able to do any, acquire new skills? So that skill upgrading become important. And so this is, in Singapore, we have started a lot of these measures. In all these three buckets, adjusting the retirement age, we took out the pension liability altogether by adopting a you know, save as you earn kind of approach. And then the skill upgrading is continuing. So except that the problem is that the government keep giving me money to upgrade my skills, but I don't know what skills I have and don't know how to upgrade. So, you know, so a lot of people using the money to take Korean classes because at least I can appreciate the TV programs better, you know. And a lot of people using it to start doing gardening courses. And in the past, they used this money to learn flower arrangement. So recently that was taken out, not approved, because that's not considered as a skill. So I'm sorry, no more flower arrangement. So now I think in my account, I got about 1,500. The government going to give me another $1,000 this year. So I would welcome any suggestions for me to do any upgrading. It's not so easy, okay, for older people. The idea is nice, enlarge the manpower pool, but if they can stay in their job, continue to perform a certain level, that's fine. The moment they get out of the job, you want them to retrain, re-enter the workforce, not so easy. Not so easy at all. And then particularly the whole structure of the economy had changed. So much emphasis on digitalization and all the high-tech stuff. Another way to rebalance the age structure is migration. Do we want to bring in migration? And Singapore, we bring in quite a lot. And that's how we are able to survive all this long. So I'll come back to this a little bit. So adoption of technology, of course, is another possibility that, you know, increasing. You go to Japan's old folks' home, you see a lot of robots running around. In Singapore, you go to a restaurant, it's quite common now to see robots bringing you the dishes and all that. So the technology will help to ease the burden of a labor shortage. But robot cannot completely replace the human beings. So if you have a huge labor supply issue, then again, how do you solve it? So an example is this. This is the entry and exit of Singapore citizens in the job market. This is an earlier study. So in 2015, the exits are about balance. Looking at the age curve, The red line is just the age curve. So entry is about 20 to 24. There was about 246K. Then at the exit at 60 to 64 is about 175K. So there is a surplus. So the labor market is still okay in some kind of balance at the macro level. That was 2015. So now, of course, in 2030, the entering workforce had dropped to 171K, but the number of exiting the workforce, even adjusted to 65, is gone up to 250K. So there is a balance. You go and talk to all the corporates in Singapore, everybody will tell you that they have a problem in the next 2 years or so, short term. Why? Because a lot of senior people, if you don't adjust the retirement age, they will leave. If they leave with a vacuum in the workforce. This is a serious issue. So looking at the labor market, looking at the entrance and looking at the exit, this kind of a labor market dynamics, do we really know it well? Have we really studied? Have we gone? So, and what are the adaptive strategies? So it's because of this that we are bringing in systematically foreign workers to help us to address this shortage. So will Singapore eventually become a bit like Dubai? That when you go to Changi Dubai airport, everybody you meet is a foreigner. In Singapore, I think that's very possible. If you go to Singapore, you see the construction sector. In every construction site, the only person you see is an Indian, not Indian, sorry, Bangladeshi and Pakistanis or what, or some Indian mix, but from South Asians. So we are already having this kind of a substitution effect to the extent of 100% saturation. That 100% of the workforce in the construction sector come from the South Asia region. So this is what's going to happen in Singapore's demographic structure. The bottom line are the residents. You can see that you're getting flatter and flatter, but we're going to have foreigners loading up on the top at the key age, productive ages. And so now in the key working age groups is probably 1 to 1, probably more foreigner than local already. In the future, probably will change from 1 local citizen or PR, that one's, or to 4 foreign workers. Easily. Yeah. The question then is, how do you manage the foreign workers, right? So, and this shows the current structure in Singapore. We hit 5.92 this year, and Singapore citizens only 3.6. And PRs constant about 500,000. Non-residents is almost 2 million, and it will easily go up. So the key to watch is employment pass and the S pass holder. These are the people in important jobs, okay? And they are potential entrants into the PR pool and potential entrants into the citizenship pool. CMP stands for Construction, Marine, and Petroleum Work Permit holders. And then and you can see that because we have a huge petroleum industry and the construction, so CMP work permit holder 24%, and the migrant worker 15%, and so on and so forth. The principle of all this is that if they are low skill, they are transient. They cannot stay. They come, they must go. They must go. Okay, government is very, very strict on this. Singapore's approach is essentially a talent policy. We know that we need people to come in to supplement our age structure, but we insist that whoever want to come in and want to stay must of certain caliber. So we save on all the human capital accumulation through primary school, secondary school. We come straight, all prepared, all ready. So look at the qualifications. This 2015 actually is, I forgot to update, it's actually the latest number, but they're all about the same. So it's all very high numbers. That post-secondary is all 80%, and then secondary and below are fewer, but we still need them. These are the bus drivers, the crane operators, the essential skills, the police officers, and all that stuff. We are hiring police officers from Taiwan, by the way, and now we and then now we are trying to hire them from somewhere else. And so this help to improve our capital, the human capital stock, and that's why when we're looking at, I have one slide to show the difference between Hong Kong and Singapore, but I didn't use it in this particular talk. It's in terms of the immigrants, the new PR, the citizen, that our profile, we get so much more human capital gain in Singapore than in Hong Kong, so much more. Because I think in Hong Kong, the new immigrants coming in are mostly through family reunion, mostly on the lower end. Does Hong Kong have a talent policy? I'm not too sure. Now they do, and very haphazard maybe. We'll discuss that a little bit later. In Singapore, we use a lot of transient workers, full-time and short-term. So full-time are the one that come in for 2 or 3 years, they have to go. And then we also, every year, every day, about 350,000 Malaysian workers will come to the causeway from Malaysia to Singapore. And then in the evening, they go back. So the question, I did this conversation with South China Morning Post some time back, almost 10 years with it, yeah. And then talking about whether they're using the talent. The question is that in Hong Kong, they like to use a stock approach, whereas we like to use the flow approach. Stock and flow approach have very different consequences. Flow means that we don't have to bear any responsibility. They come, they go. Stock is that they come, then you just take care of them. So that is the European model, stock approach. That's why you end up with all these Turkish immigrants in Germany, you have all these Algerian immigrants in Paris, and then they're creating all kinds of troubles. So stock and flow different. So the question at that time when I was talking about the South China Morning Post, luckily they didn't use the word crisis at that time. Yeah. Whether you can create such a flow approach, well-regulated flow approach. Then, of course, we would need to talk about the rebalancing of marriage and fertility. So Singapore, we have a lot of policies, and it's well known, and so to do all that, you need to assess the changing perception of family, work-life balance, as what the European people are talking about, facilitating marriage and parenthood, and also accepting of the unmarried. In Singapore, we have a strange situation that the government controls the housing supply. And in the old days, we try to force the people to get married. So you're not married, you're not able to have access to government supply, housing supply. But then we tried that, and then but later on we found out that it didn't work. So for political reasons, they also opened up because the singles getting bigger and bigger, they become a significant voting bloc. So the government has relaxed, and now singles can also apply for government housing, the HDB flats. So the question now, the unmarried people, the pool in this Asian society is getting bigger and bigger. So what are the roles that they perform, societal roles, and then what do they do, and then how do they adjust in a very, very family-oriented society? It's a very interesting question. And then most of them now, the single people are doing very well, very successful. And in the old days, we were told not to highlight people who are single and doing well, because that would set a very bad example. People should be married and doing well. So, but now luckily things change a little bit, okay? We are not that old-fashioned anymore. And so the family package comes in many ways, and then the latest is the paternity leave, 4 weeks, maternity leave, 4 months. that is considered generous. And a baby bonus, and then all kinds of schemes to support family and all that stuff. Then you will ask, with all this support, then how come the fertility rate is still so low? That is the puzzle that I've been thinking for the past 35 years. So, and then I look at some of the, say, the family allowance given by Japan, by Taiwan, by some of the countries. I don't know how much is it in Hong Kong. I said, it's so little. We are giving so much and yet we get no results. And these countries, they expect to get results from giving so little money. They must be dreaming, you know, it's totally not possible. When we started in 1986, we already give out 20,000 Singapore dollars per birth. 20,000. And so we get a bump, and then people say, later on now, they say, 20,000, what is 20,000? I mean, now, so the price has gone up, okay? Just like, you know, and, but people appreciate maternity leave, and people appreciate paternity leave. The question here is that maybe using all these measures is not a measure to encourage larger family size, because that's being affected by the people's family ideals. How many kids do they want to have? But to maintain a foundation that the family is still important and create social stability. Maybe the main problem is not so much the family. Maybe the main problem is the marriage. The marriage is the key. The marriage is a very complicated sociological problem. When we created all these social networking mechanism, so we did generate quite a lot of marriages. And you know, if not, I think the situation will be even worse. I remember I did a study tour to Japan to study the Mitsubishi matchmaking system. And then we introduced something like that in Singapore. That was way back in the early 1990s. And then then we have many social activities for the singles. Yeah. But nowadays, so I asked my staff and some other friends that all these matchmaking mechanisms all have been replaced by market mechanism. This, you know, coffee and bagel. And then, and some of the famous one, what is that one? I must be out of touch. I can't remember the names already. There are a lot of dating sites that people are using, and these dating sites have been fully accepted. So one of my friends, he had 3 kids, and all the kids use the dating sites to find their partners, and so there is hope, you know. I don't know, the culture is changing, the marriage attitude is changing, and so, but marriage is the key. For some reason in Asian society, birth out of wedlock is still very little. In Europe, there's quite a big proportion. So in Europe, you cannot talk about marriage as a solution. In Asia, in order for somebody to get into the procreation, they have to get married. So this is part of a reality, cultural reality that we have to accept. So one of the things that we open up when you have so many migrants is that the society will start changing. A lot of our locals marry foreigners. Non-citizen brides, a lot of them come from Asia, and a lot of them come from Vietnam. Vietnam brides are very much in demand. And they come for a few years, and then they open up a Vietnamese supermarket and a coffee shop and all that stuff. So we are being infiltrated. But it's in the nature of things. In the government used to control and trying to reduce, but we had to face the reality that we have to enlarge the marriage market to make it in such a way that there is a flexibility. If the Singapore marriage market cannot satisfy individuals in finding a spouse, open it up. So that's exactly, so the problem is that every Singapore, 1/3 of Singapore family now, the new formed family, in fact for many years, are of mixed nationality. But eventually they converge back to Singapore if they are of certain, but I must also say that In Singapore, the talent policy is always more important than the family policy. This is a basic premise for planning. So in other words, if I married a Vietnamese girl, pretty, very nice, very good housewife, no education. So if there's a divorce, that girl, even though have babies in Singapore citizens, that girl had to return to Vietnam. Why? Because she failed meeting the talent criteria. She had no education. So this created a lot of dynamics, you know. We were saying that, hey, this mother had 2 kids, and kids are Singaporeans. But the government will say that, who's going to support her? The government is not going to support her because she had no education. She cannot fit into a Singapore society. So send her back. So there have been a lot of negotiation. But now the government is slightly more sympathetic because a lot of them are able to open up the supermarkets. Because, you know, they become good shopkeepers. They are very entrepreneurial. They may not have education. The trouble is that our talent policy is very much well structurally defined. That we are not measuring entrepreneurial activity. We were looking at purely on education. So population aging will continue to be an issue, and it's a big issue. And then how do you build an inclusive society? How do you meet the needs? And most important of all, how do you maintain fiscal integrity and economic dynamism? That is really important. Now we are talking about 100-year life. And it's quite realistic that people are moving on to the 90s and to 100. And how do you structure all these new activities? And, so let me just give you an example about the need for fiscal integrity. So this Taiwan, this is something I did earlier on. So this is the current population of Taiwan 2016 when I did it, and this is 2040 for Taiwan. And that you can see that the drop in the prime working age population, okay? So the problem with this is that in Taiwan, Taiwan has a very generous health insurance mechanism. And who is paying for the premium? Anybody who's old, the government pay. Incredible. And then, and how to top up? They expect the younger people who are in the workforce to pay to contribute the largest share to the health expenditure. But then with the shortfall, and there is a 2 million shortfall in the number of contributors to this health insurance, then who is going to carry the burden for health insurance, for such a generous health insurance mechanism for the older people in Taiwan? Nobody thought about it. Nobody want to address this issue, given the Taiwan politics. And Taiwan has no systematic policy to deal with the heavy welfare burden that's coming on in face of a rapidly aging society and a declining working age population. Very, very big problem. Among all the countries, I would ask me, who do you think is the most vulnerable country to population aging? I would put Taiwan. Taiwan is in serious trouble. But then on the other hand, you also have places like Hong Kong who give out transport subsidies for no right or reasons. So all of a sudden, suddenly 60 years of age can get such a huge transportation subsidy. I don't understand. Nobody understands it. And that's totally fiscally irresponsible. Irresponsible. Because you cannot continue like this. Baby boomers coming in, you are just throwing good money for nothing. There's absolutely no returns. This is not a welfare consideration. It's not a developmental consideration. What kind of consideration is that? Political consideration. So I'm not a fan of the previous administration. So population change is a defining issue for the future. It's a mega trend with a lot of wide-ranging implications. This is a very short talk. I cannot go into the details. But most important of all, I would like to stress to you that the national competitiveness will be eroded when you do not manage this well. And I will see that a lot of countries are getting into this situation. If they don't seriously consider all the angles. And so, but then on the other hand, like Singapore, we depend a lot of our workforce from regional countries and other countries. Geo-economics become important, and bilateral relationship become important. And we also becoming more realized of manpower security. During COVID, when the border is closed, then we realized that, hey, we have a problem because our labor supply is kept as zero growth, zero base. In fact, a lot of people have left for Malaysia. We are tremendously short of manpower. So we had to make a lot of adjustments. Buses are running at longer intervals and a lot of other things. So manpower security is become also an important concern. But most important of all is that the government have to take responsibility. If the government doesn't take responsibility seriously and start pushing for more holistic policies, that particular country's national competitiveness will be eroded for sure. But on the other hand, with safeguards, I think the national well-being can still be good. And then Nikkei Stock Exchange hit the highest mark a few days ago. Japan, despite the rapidly aging society, still managing quite well. So we used to use Japan as a counter thesis to Singapore. Singapore rely a lot on migration. Japan rely a lot more on internal adjustment. So which is the better model? I don't know. Nobody knows. But in Singapore, we live quite comfortably. In Japan, they live quite comfortably. We are all complaining about, one side we complain too many foreigners, the other side complain not enough workers. So I don't know what is the best solution. Time will tell. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Before that, I will go to Singapore to watch Taylor Swift's concerts first.
That one you won't get any racial issue.
After talking to you yesterday, I went online and checked the tickets are still available. It's amazing that your government is able to get her to have 6 concerts. Yeah, 6 different concerts next week.
Whether you get scammed or not.
Oh, it's an official website. Anyhow, time is almost up. Thank you so much, Professor Cheung, for a very wonderful, insightful, informative session on population aging. I think we all got some new knowledge to handle this challenging problem for your countries. If you live in Hong Kong, you should also try to learn something from Singapore, but it's quite interesting to see a Singaporean talking about Singapore is not winning every possible game, including on a soccer field. So thank you.